The alarm inside my observation pod screamed before I even opened my eyes. Red light filled the small chamber, pulsing against the curved walls, and my hearing organs rang with the sound of 1,000 data streams trying to update at once. I had never heard my own systems panic before. I had never needed to. "Report," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. The pod's mind answered in its usual flat tone, the tone that never changes, no matter what is happening outside. "Human fleet has engaged the Dravani War Group. Contact was made 4 minutes ago. You are currently 0.6 light seconds from the conflict zone." 4 minutes. I had been assigned to this post only 6 hours earlier, and already the galaxy's newest and smallest species was doing something my superiors said was impossible. "My name is Elune, and I belong to a species called the Ketra. We are old. We have watched thousands of battles across thousands of years, and we have never once needed to raise our voices while doing it. We built our entire civilization around distance, around watching without being touched. That is our gift, and it is also, I now understand, our weakness. I had been sent here as a simple assignment: watch the humans fight the Dravani, record the outcome, return with data. My commanding officer, a Ketra elder named Sorinth, had told me this would be easy work, almost beneath my training. "They are young," Sorinth had said, his eyes half closed with boredom before I even left. "Barely out of their own solar system. The Dravani outnumber them, outgun them, and have fought 100 wars before humanity learned to fly. This will be over before you finish your first log entry." I believed him. I had no reason not to. Now floating in the dark with alarms screaming around me, I understood that Sorinth had never actually watched a human fight. None of us had. We had only read reports written by other species who had already lost. I forced myself to look at the main viewing screen. What I saw made my breathing organs seize. The Dravani War Group was enormous. 12 capital ships, each one larger than any single Ketra vessel, moved in perfect formation above a small blue and green world. I recognized the formation from old records. It was called the closing hand, a tactic used to surround and crush anything caught inside it. I had seen this formation succeed against 3 other species in the last standard year alone. Against the Dravani fleet, the humans had sent 7 ships. 7. I checked my sensors twice, certain there was an error. There was no error. 7 human ships, none of them larger than a Dravani escort vessel, had flown directly into the center of the closing hand without slowing down. "This is not a battle," I whispered to no one. "This is a funeral." I opened a channel to record the tactical data, the way I had been trained to do 1,000 times before. My hands, 4 fingers on each, moved without thinking, capturing ship positions, weapon signatures, energy output. This was my job. Watch, record, stay calm, stay distant. I told myself I could handle this. I was wrong. The human fleet split apart the moment the Dravani formation began to close. I expected panic. I expected the kind of disorganized scattering I had seen from other young species facing overwhelming force. Instead, the 7 ships moved like a single living thing that had suddenly decided to become 7 separate threats at once. A human voice crackled through the open channel I was monitoring, one that the Dravani had not yet managed to block. "Formation Wolf. Everyone knows their job. Nobody dies today if I can help it." The voice belonged to a woman. Her name, according to the fleet registry I had already pulled, was Commander Grace Whitfield. She sounded calm, not the forced calm of someone hiding fear, but a real, steady calm, like she was discussing the weather instead of facing certain destruction. I did not understand it. My translation software double-checked itself twice, certain it had made an error in tone. It had not. The Dravani commander, a war leader named Threx Cole, whose voice I had heard in older recordings, responded with open confusion. "Human vessel, you are outnumbered 12-7. Your position is untenable. Surrender your colony world, and your ships will not be destroyed." There was a pause. Then Commander Whitfield answered, and her voice had a strange warmth to it that I had never heard directed at an enemy before. "Thanks for the offer. We're going to have to pass. The closing hand formation began to tighten. I watched the 12 Dravani ships move to surround the human fleet exactly as the tactic demanded. Any species I had observed before this moment would have been trapped, crushed within minutes. The humans did something different. Instead of trying to escape the closing formation, they flew deeper into it. My sensors struggled to track the movement. Human ships, small and fast, wove between the larger Dravani vessels at speeds that made my own equipment strain to keep up. They were using the size of the enemy formation against itself, staying so close to the larger ships that the Dravani could not fire without risking their own vessels. "They are inside the hand," I said aloud, though there was no one to hear me. "They should not be able to do that. No one does that." A soft chime interrupted my thoughts. My pod's recording system flagged something for priority review. I opened the flagged data and found a private message, one not meant for enemy ears, but caught by my superior sensors anyway. It was a young human voice, male, shaking slightly. "Commander, I've got damage on Deck 4. We're venting atmosphere." "Seal it and keep flying, Peter," Whitfield answered immediately. "You get your people out of that section, and you keep your ship in the fight. I need you for 2 more minutes." "Copy that. 2 more minutes." He said it like it was nothing, like the idea of holding a dying ship together for 2 more minutes against overwhelming odds was simply another task on a long list of tasks. I had recorded thousands of battles. I had watched proud species surrender the moment their flagship took damage. I had watched entire fleets retreat over far smaller losses than what this human pilot named Peter was describing. And yet his voice held no hint of giving up. Only calculation, only work still to be done. The battle unfolded faster than my mind wanted to process. The Dravani, confused by tactics they had never encountered, began to break their own formation trying to adjust. Ships that had been positioned to crush the human fleet now found themselves firing dangerously close to each other, afraid of hitting their own side. "Formation is breaking down," I reported into my log, my voice unsteady. "Enemy coordination is failing. Human losses at 0. I repeat, human losses at 0. I should have felt satisfaction at capturing such rare data. Instead, I felt something closer to fear, a sensation my species rarely experiences and almost never discusses. Because I realized, watching those 7 small ships dance between 12 giants, that the humans were not simply lucky. They were not simply skilled either, though they clearly were both of those things. There was something else driving them, something my careful Ketra mind could not categorize no matter how many angles I examined it from. They were not fighting like creatures trying to survive. They were fighting like creatures who had already decided survival was not the point. A massive explosion lit up my viewing screen, and for one terrible moment I thought I was witnessing the destruction of a human vessel. My scanners corrected the error almost instantly. It was a Dravani escort ship, caught in a crossfire created by its own fleet's confusion, destroyed by friendly weapons fire while trying to track a human ship that had already moved somewhere else entirely. "Confirm Dravani losses," I said, my voice trembling now in a way I could not control. 1 escort vessel destroyed. Cause: enemy-friendly fire. Threx Cole's voice returned to the open channel, and this time the confusion had turned to something sharper, something I recognized from centuries of recordings as the sound of a commander realizing, too late, that they had misjudged their opponent. "Reform. Reform the hand. Do not let them stay inside our lines." "Too late for that," Whitfield answered, and I swore I could hear the shape of a smile in her voice. "You already let us in." I did not understand humans. I had been told, before I ever left my homeworld, that this assignment would be simple, that watching them would be no different than watching any other young species stumble through an early conflict. I had believed the reports. I had believed Sorinth. I had believed my entire civilization's careful, distant, unshaken confidence that nothing in this galaxy could surprise a species as old and wise as mine. Floating alone in my small pod, watching 7 ships refuse to behave the way 7 outnumbered ships were supposed to behave, I felt that confidence crack, for the first time in my long life. I checked my chronometer. Only 6 minutes had passed since the battle began. 6 minutes, and already I understood that everything I thought I knew about war, about fear, about the limits of what a young and small species could do against impossible odds, was wrong. I reached out to close my recording log for a brief pause, needing a moment to steady my thoughts before continuing. My hand hovered over the control, shaking slightly. Then a new voice broke through the channel, calm as the others, but carrying words that stopped my hand completely. "Commander, Dravani flagship is moving to intercept the colony transports. They're going for the civilians." There was a silence on the channel that lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt to me like it stretched across the entire dark space between us. Then Whitfield's voice returned, quieter now, but no less steady. "Not on my watch. Everyone hold position. I'm taking point." I did not know it then, floating helpless and small in my observation pod, recording data I no longer fully understood, but that single sentence marked the true beginning of everything that followed. Everything that would change how I saw this species, how I saw war itself, and how I saw my own careful, distant, frightened heart. I had been told to watch humans in battle. I had no idea, in that moment, just how much I was about to wish I had never gone. I watched Commander Whitfield's ship break away from the others and understood, in a way that made my whole body go still, that she was flying directly toward the largest and most dangerous vessel in the entire Dravani fleet. The transports she was trying to protect were not military ships. My scanners identified them easily. 3 slow, heavy vessels loaded with colonists, families, and supplies, moving away from the contested world as fast as their engines allowed. They had no weapons capable of defending themselves. They had been built to carry people, not to fight. The Dravani flagship, a vessel easily 10 times the size of Whitfield's small ship, turned its full attention toward them. "Commander, that's a command cruiser," a voice said over the channel, tight with something I now recognized as concern rather than fear. I had learned, in the short time I had been listening, that humans expressed concern differently than fear. Concern still had room for action inside it. "You can't take that alone." "I'm not planning to take it alone," Whitfield answered. "I'm planning to slow it down until Daniel gets the transports clear." "Cole, how's it looking back there?" A new voice answered, younger, quick, carrying the particular strain of someone doing several things at once. "Almost there, Commander. 2 more minutes and they're past the debris field and into jump range." "Then I've got 2 minutes to be annoying," Whitfield said. I did not understand the word choice at first. My translation systems offered several possible meanings, none of which seemed to fit a moment where a single small ship was about to face a vessel capable of ending it in a single strike. But as I watched what happened next, I began to understand exactly what she meant. Whitfield's ship did not attack the flagship directly. It could not have survived a direct confrontation, and she clearly knew this. Instead, she flew a pattern that kept her ship constantly at the very edge of the flagship's weapon range, forcing its gunners to track a target that refused to sit still, refused to commit to a straight line, refused to behave the way any predictable enemy should. "She's using herself as bait," I said aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "She is deliberately drawing their attention away from the ships she cannot protect any other way." The flagship's weapons fired again and again, each shot missing by margins so small that I felt something twist inside my chest with every near strike. My species is not built for this kind of tension. We are built for distance, for careful observation, for the comfortable certainty that whatever we are watching cannot reach us. I had never felt my own body react to someone else's danger before. I did not like it. I could not stop it either. Threx Cole's voice returned to the channel, and this time there was no attempt at diplomacy left in it. "Target that vessel. Target it now. I do not care about the transports. I care about that ship." "Copy that," Whitfield said, and I understood then that she had wanted exactly this. She had wanted the entire attention of the most dangerous ship in the fleet turned toward herself, away from the families trying to escape. 90 seconds, Cole's voice reported. 90 seconds to jump range. I checked my own sensors and felt something I can only describe as dread settle into my system. Whitfield's ship had taken damage. Not catastrophic damage, not yet, but enough that I could see the edges of her hull losing integrity under the strain of dodging weapons fire built to destroy vessels far larger than hers. "Commander, your shields are at 40%, a voice reported, one I now recognized as belonging to a communications officer named Claire Dobson. "You need to pull back." "Not yet," Whitfield answered. "Cole, talk to me." 60 seconds. "Copy. I can hold 60 seconds." I did not understand how she could say those words with such steadiness. I ran calculations of my own, comparing her ship's remaining shield strength against the rate of incoming fire, and my results told me that 60 seconds was not a safe number. 60 seconds was, by every measure my species uses to judge such things, the edge of what was survivable, and possibly past it. She said it anyway. She said it like a promise she intended to keep no matter what it cost her. I found myself doing something I had never done before during an observation assignment. I stopped simply recording the data and began, without meaning to, hoping that the numbers were wrong. Hoping that this small ship, piloted by a voice that refused to sound afraid, would somehow survive the next 60 seconds. My people do not hope during observations. We record. We remain distant. Hope implies attachment, and attachment implies exactly the kind of vulnerability that had kept my species safe and detached for thousands of years. I hoped anyway. I could not stop myself. The flagship's weapons found their mark at the 50-second point. I saw the strike land against Whitfield's ship, saw the shields flare and then fail along one entire side of the hull. My sensors registered a hull breach, a serious one, and for one long, terrible moment, I believed I was about to witness the end of the woman whose calm voice had somehow, in the space of a few short minutes, become the center of everything I was recording. "Commander," Dobson's voice cracked with something raw. There was a pause, a long one, long enough that I found myself gripping the edges of my own console, a physical reaction I had no memory of ever performing before. Then Whitfield's voice returned, strained now, breathing harder than before, but still there, still working. "Still flying. Cole, time. 30 seconds. "Copy that. I can do 30 seconds. She had said the same thing before, about 60 seconds that had already cost her a hull breach, and judging by the strain in her voice, quite possibly more than that. And yet she said it again, as though the cost of the first 30 seconds had no bearing on her willingness to spend 30 more. I began to understand something in that moment. Something that would only grow clearer as the battle continued. Humans did not measure the value of a choice by what it cost them personally. They measured it by what it protected. Whitfield was not thinking about her own survival at all. She was thinking about 3 transport ships full of people she likely had never met, and about a number counting down toward the moment those people would be safe. The flagship fired again. I watched the shot connect, watched Whitfield's ship shudder under the impact, watched her weapons systems flicker and die on my sensor readout. "Weapons are gone," she reported, her voice tighter now but not broken. "Still have engines, still flying." 15 seconds, Cole said, and I could hear now that his voice was shaking too, the calm professional tone cracking under the weight of watching someone he clearly cared about take damage meant to protect people he had never even seen. "Copy. 15 seconds. I do not know how to describe what I felt during those 15 seconds. My translation software has no word in my own language for it, because my own language was never built to describe watching someone choose, again and again, to stay in danger for the sake of strangers. The closest word I can offer, borrowed entirely from human vocabulary, is admiration, though even that feels too small for what I actually experienced. "Transports away," Cole announced, and for the first time since the battle began, his voice broke completely into something like relief. "They're clear. They made the jump." "Copy that," Whitfield said. Then, after a pause that felt heavier than any silence I had recorded before, she added, "Pulling back now." Her ship turned away from the flagship, engines straining, hull damaged, weapons gone, and began limping back toward the rest of the human fleet. The flagship fired one final shot as she retreated, a shot that clipped her already damaged hull and sent her ship spinning briefly before she managed to correct. "I'm okay," she said, before anyone could ask. "I'm okay. Everyone stay focused. We're not done yet." I realized, watching her ship limp back into formation, that she had never once, in the entire encounter, asked for help. She had informed her people of the danger, had kept them updated on her status, but she had never once broken from her task to ask that someone save her instead. She had treated her own survival as a secondary concern to the completion of her purpose, and she had done it with a steadiness that made my own careful, distant Ketra mind feel suddenly very small. The rest of the human fleet, meanwhile, had not been idle during those tense minutes. While Whitfield drew the flagship's attention, the other 6 ships had continued their strange, weaving battle inside the collapsing closing hand formation, picking apart the confused Dravani vessels one small strike at a time. "Enemy escort down," Dobson reported. "That's 3 now." "Copy. Cole, status on the flagship?" "Still tracking us, Commander, but its weapons are cycling slower than before. I think Grant managed to hit something important on his last pass." A new voice, one belonging to the pilot named Peter Grant, whose earlier report of venting atmosphere I had recorded, answered with something that almost sounded like satisfaction, despite the strain clearly present underneath it. "Clipped their forward array. Should buy us some time. Good work. Everyone hold formation. We finish this together." I sat in my small pod, surrounded by the quiet hum of my own recording systems, and found myself thinking about something Sorenth had told me before I left. He had said humans were simple to understand because they were young, and young species always behaved according to the same basic patterns of fear and self-preservation that every other species eventually outgrows. I had believed him completely. I no longer believed him at all. What I was witnessing was not simple. It was not the behavior of creatures driven by fear or basic survival instinct. It was something far more complicated, something built from choices these humans made, again and again, moment after moment, even when those choices cost them dearly. They protected each other. They protected strangers. They stayed calm under pressure that should have broken them, and when the danger grew worse instead of better, they did not retreat into panic. They simply kept working. I did not know in that moment whether to call this bravery or something else entirely, something my species had no proper word for at all. I only knew that my careful, distant heart, the heart of a species built for observation and detachment, had somehow become tangled in the outcome of a battle I was never meant to feel anything about. The Dravani flagship, damaged and confused by tactics it clearly had never encountered before, began pulling back from the main engagement, its weapons still cycling too slowly to be effective. Threx Cole's voice returned to the channel, and for the first time since the battle began, it carried something other than confusion or anger. It carried the first, faint edge of fear. "Pull remaining ships back," he ordered. "Reform at the outer perimeter. I want a full assessment before we commit further." I recorded his words carefully, understanding that I was witnessing something rare and important. A war leader who had entered this engagement with overwhelming numerical superiority was now choosing caution over aggression, and I suspected, watching the data unfold in front of me, that this decision had nothing to do with the numbers on either side. It had everything to do with the simple, terrifying fact that his enemy refused to behave the way an outmatched enemy should. The battle was far from over. I could see that clearly in the positioning of the remaining ships, in the tension still present in every voice on the human channel, in the careful, deliberate way Whitfield's crew continued preparing for whatever came next, even as they caught their breath from what had already happened. But something had shifted in those tense, terrifying minutes, something I understood instinctively even though I had never witnessed anything like it before. The Dravani had come expecting an easy victory against a young, small, unremarkable species. They were leaving that assumption behind, now, piece by piece, the same way I was leaving behind everything Sorenth had told me before this assignment began. I checked my chronometer again. 11 minutes had passed since the first alarm woke me from my calm, distant certainty about what this assignment would be. 11 minutes, and I already knew, with a clarity that frightened me more than the battle itself, that I would never again believe a report written by someone who had not actually watched humans fight for themselves. The pause in the fighting did not last long enough for me to steady myself. I had used the brief lull to update my logs, to try and organize the flood of readings my systems had gathered, but my hands moved slower than usual, distracted by thoughts that had no place in a proper observation report. I kept returning to the image of Whitfield's ship spinning under that final strike, kept hearing the crack in Cole's voice when he thought she might not answer. My pod's mind interrupted my thoughts with a new alert. Dravani fleet is repositioning. New formation detected. I turned my attention back to the view screen and felt my breathing organs tighten again. Threx Cole had abandoned the closing hand entirely. In its place, the remaining 9 Dravani ships were forming a tighter, more aggressive line, one designed not to surround the humans, but to overwhelm them with concentrated firepower aimed at a single target. I recognized the formation from the old records I had studied before this assignment. It was called the Iron Line, and it was used only when a Dravani commander believed subtlety had failed, and raw force was the only remaining option. Threx Cole's voice returned to the channel, and this time it carried none of the earlier confidence. What remained was something colder, something more desperate. We end this now. Full barrage on the lead vessel. Concentrate everything. I understood immediately what this meant. The Dravani were no longer trying to win cleanly. They were trying to force a result through sheer overwhelming power, aimed at whichever human ship presented the largest target. That ship, according to my sensors, was Commander Whitfield's, still limping from the damage she had taken protecting the transports. Incoming fire pattern detected, Dobson's voice reported, tight with urgency. Commander, they're focusing everything on us. I see it, Whitfield answered. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath it now, the weight of decisions made too quickly, one after another, without rest. Options? There was a pause on the channel, filled with the sound of rapid calculations, of a crew working together under pressure that would have broken far older, far more experienced beings than themselves. We could scatter, a new voice offered, one belonging to a tactical officer named Oliver Hunt, whose calm, measured tone reminded me strangely of my own species' careful analytical patterns. Split their fire across multiple targets, reduces the concentration hitting any single ship. But it means nobody can properly protect Grace's ship if the timing goes wrong, Cole added, his voice tight. I noted the use of her personal name rather than her title, a detail my translation software flagged as significant. Under extreme pressure, this crew was not retreating into cold professionalism. If anything, they were becoming more personal, more connected to each other, not less. Do it, Whitfield said, before anyone could argue further. Scatter formation. I can take a hit if it means the rest of you stay clear. Commander, that's an order, Oliver. Silence followed, heavy and reluctant, before Hunt's voice returned, quieter now. Copy that. Scattering formation. I watched the 6 other human ships break apart, moving in different directions at speeds that strained even my advanced sensors to properly track. Whitfield's damaged ship remained roughly in place, presenting itself as the largest, most obvious target for the incoming Dravani barrage. She was doing it again, placing herself directly in danger so that others might have a better chance of surviving. I found myself gripping the edges of my console once more, a physical reaction to watching events I had no ability to influence. This was the fundamental rule of my profession, the rule drilled into every Ketra observer since childhood. We watch. We do not interfere. We remain distant, because distance is what allows us to see clearly, to record accurately, to remain useful long after the beings we observe have lived and died. I had never before understood how much that distance actually cost until I felt myself wanting, desperately, to reach through the empty space between my pod and that damaged human ship and somehow pull it out of harm's way. I could not. I had no such ability. All I could do was watch, and record, and hope. The iron line fired. 9 ships released their combined firepower at once, a wall of energy aimed directly at Whitfield's position. I had seen this kind of barrage destroy far sturdier vessels in past recordings. There was no reasonable calculation, by any measure my species uses, that suggested her damaged ship could survive a direct hit from such overwhelming force. "Brace!" Whitfield called out, and then the barrage struck. My sensors flared white with the intensity of the impact, and for several long seconds I could not get a clear reading on what remained. The static cleared slowly, and when it did, I saw something that made no sense according to any of my prior calculations. Whitfield's ship was still there, damaged further, venting atmosphere from multiple new breaches, drifting slightly off its original heading, but still there, still intact enough that its transponder continued broadcasting a steady signal. "Report," I demanded of my own systems, needing to understand what I was seeing. "Vessel evaded 70% of incoming fire through a last-second maneuver," my pod's mind answered. "Remaining impact absorbed by forward shielding before failure. Hull integrity currently at 22%. 22%. That was not survival by any comfortable margin. That was survival by the thinnest possible thread, a thread that should have snapped, and somehow, through skill or luck or something my species has no proper word for, had not." "Commander!" Dobson's voice was raw with relief and fear both at once. "Commander, please respond." There was a pause, longer than I could bear, before Whitfield's voice returned, weaker now, strained with obvious pain, but present. "Still here," she said. "That one hurt, though." A ragged sound came over the channel that I eventually identified, after cross-referencing my translation database, as something between a laugh and a sob, coming from more than one voice at once. The relief of her crew, hearing her voice survive that impossible barrage, was so raw and immediate that it transmitted clearly, even through the imperfect medium of subspace communication. "Get clear," Hunt's voice ordered. All business again despite the emotion clearly still present underneath. "Grant, Bennett, cover her retreat. Everyone else, target their forward line while their weapons are cycling down." "Copy that." Several voices answered at once, and I watched the remaining human ships converge on the momentarily vulnerable Dravani formation with a coordination that made my recording system struggle to keep pace with the rapid tactical shifts. I noticed, in that moment, something I had not fully appreciated before. The humans were not fighting as individuals seeking personal glory or survival. They were fighting as a single connected unit, each person's actions shaped entirely around protecting the others, around covering weaknesses, around ensuring that no single failure would become a catastrophe for the whole group. This was not how my species conducted warfare in the rare instances we engaged in it directly. Ketra combat doctrine, what little exists, emphasizes individual survival and calculated risk avoidance above almost everything else. We do not throw ourselves into danger for others unless the mathematics clearly favor doing so. These humans had thrown away the mathematics entirely. They acted as though the well-being of the group mattered more than the careful preservation of any single life within it, including, apparently, the life of their own commander. The Dravani line, still recovering from the effort of their massive barrage, found themselves suddenly exposed to a coordinated human counterattack. Precision strikes targeted weapon systems, engine arrays, and shield generators with an accuracy that suggested this crew had studied Dravani ship designs extensively before ever engaging in combat. "Enemy shields failing on lead vessel," Dobson reported. 3 more escorts showing critical damage. Threx Cole's voice returned to the channel, and the desperation I had detected earlier had grown into something far more raw. "Pull back. All ships, pull back to defensive positions." "They're running," Grant's voice said, disbelief evident even through the strain of continued combat maneuvers. "They're actually running." "Don't get overconfident," Whitfield's voice cut in, weaker than before, but still carrying clear authority. Wounded animals are the most dangerous. Cole, status on repairs? Emergency patches holding for now, Commander. We won't survive another direct hit like that last one, but we're stable. Copy. Everyone maintain formation. Let them retreat if they want to retreat. We're not chasing anyone today. I found this decision curious at first, given the clear advantage the humans now held. My initial calculations suggested pursuing the retreating Dravani forces would have resulted in significant additional enemy losses, potentially even the destruction of their damaged flagship entirely. Whitfield chose not to pursue. Why? I asked myself aloud, genuinely puzzled by a decision that seemed to contradict everything I had witnessed about human determination and refusal to yield ground. Why let them go when victory is within reach? I found my answer moments later when a new transmission opened on a different frequency, one clearly not intended for Dravani ears at all. This is Commander Whitfield to Colony Ground Command. Status report on civilian casualties? A voice answered from the surface below, strained with its own kind of exhaustion. Minimal casualties reported, Commander. Your fleet's positioning kept most of the bombardment away from populated areas. We've got some structural damage, but nothing our people can't rebuild. Copy that. Glad to hear it. Keep your people in shelters until we confirm the Dravani fleet has fully withdrawn from the system. Will do, Commander. And, thank you. We saw what your ship did out there. Everyone down here saw it. There was a pause before Whitfield answered, and I detected something in her voice that I had not heard from her before during this entire encounter. Something quieter, more personal, less like a commander addressing her forces, and more like simply one person speaking to another. Just doing the job, she said. That's what we're here for. I understood then why she had chosen not to pursue the retreating Dravani fleet. Her purpose had never been about destroying the enemy for its own sake. It had been about protecting the people below, the colonists whose only crime was living somewhere the Dravani had decided to claim as their own. Once that protection was secured, once the immediate threat to those lives had passed, continuing the fight for the sake of additional enemy losses held no appeal for her at all. She was willing to accept a Dravani retreat as a satisfactory outcome, even with the tactical advantage clearly in her favor, because her goal had never been about winning in the way my species typically measures victory. Her goal had been about protecting people. That goal had been achieved. Everything beyond that point was, to her, unnecessary risk for insufficient reward. I sat with this realization for a long moment, feeling something shift inside my careful, analytical mind. I had come into this assignment believing humans would demonstrate simple, predictable patterns of survival-driven combat, easily categorized and filed away alongside 100 other young species I had studied throughout my career. Instead, I was witnessing something far more complicated, a species that fought with tremendous skill and determination, yes, but one whose underlying motivations seemed built around protection and connection rather than domination or conquest. They did not fight to prove superiority. They fought because something they cared about was threatened, and once that threat was addressed, their aggression simply stopped. I did not know what to make of this pattern. It did not fit neatly into any of the categories my species uses to understand warfare and conflict among the species we observe. It felt, in some ways, more advanced than anything I had encountered before, even among species far older and more technologically developed than humanity currently was. The Dravani fleet completed its retreat, jumping away from the system entirely rather than risk further engagement with a force that had proven far more capable than their initial assessments suggested. I watched Threx Cole's flagship vanish from my sensors, its system still flagging significant damage even in the final moments before the jump completed. Silence fell across the human communication channel, the kind of heavy, exhausted silence that follows intense danger finally passing. I could hear the sounds of relieved breathing, of quiet conversations breaking out between crew members who had, only moments before, been entirely focused on survival and now found themselves with space to simply exist again. "Damage report," Whitfield finally said, her voice carrying clear exhaustion now that the immediate danger had passed. "Significant across the fleet, Commander," Hunt answered. "Your ship took the worst of it, obviously. Grant's got some hull breaches but nothing critical. Everyone else reporting moderate to minor damage. Casualties?" There was a pause before Hunt answered, and I found myself holding whatever passes for breath among my species, waiting to hear the answer to a question I had not realized mattered so much to me until that exact moment. 3 injured across the fleet, Commander. Nothing life-threatening, no fatalities. The relief that swept through the channel was almost tangible, even filtered through my imperfect translation systems. 7 ships had faced 12, had faced overwhelming numerical and technological disadvantage, had protected a colony world and its civilian population, and had done so without losing a single life among their own crew. I checked my own logs, comparing this outcome against every similar engagement I had ever studied or recorded throughout my long career as an observer. I found nothing comparable. Species far older, far more experienced in the ways of warfare, had suffered devastating losses in engagements far less lopsided than the one I had just witnessed. Humans, barely established beyond their own solar system, had achieved something my careful analytical mind struggled to properly categorize. "Good work, everyone," Whitfield said, her voice carrying genuine warmth despite the obvious exhaustion underneath it. "Let's get home and get some rest. We earned it today." I closed my recording log for the final segment of the battle, my hands moving slower than usual, weighed down by thoughts I had never expected to carry into a simple observation assignment. I had come here believing I understood war, believing my long career studying countless species across countless conflicts had prepared me for anything I might witness. I understood now, sitting alone in my small pod, with the aftermath of the battle spread across my sensors, that I had understood nothing at all. Not about war, and certainly not about the small, determined, endlessly surprising species I had been sent to observe. The battle was over, but I understood, even then, that whatever had shifted inside me during those tense, terrifying minutes was only beginning to reveal its true weight. I had watched humans fight for the first time, and something about that experience had changed me in ways I did not yet fully understand, ways that would only become clearer as I continued my observation into the quiet, painful hours that followed. The hours that followed the battle taught me more about humans than the battle itself ever had. I remained in position, my pod cloaked and silent, continuing my assignment as though nothing inside me had changed. This was, after all, what proper observation required. Watch until the assignment is complete. Record everything. Return with data. I told myself these familiar rules over and over, hoping they might restore some of the distance I had lost during those terrifying minutes of combat. They did not. Whitfield's damaged fleet made no immediate move to leave the system. Instead, they settled into a loose defensive formation above the colony world, allowing repair crews to begin the slow work of patching hull breaches and restoring damaged systems. I watched small maintenance vessels move between the ships, carrying supplies and personnel, the entire fleet functioning like a single organism tending to its own wounds. I expected, based on everything I had studied about military operations across dozens of species, that the crews would use this time efficiently and impersonally, focused entirely on the practical business of repair and readiness for whatever might come next. Efficiency, after all, is what survival requires. What I witnessed instead surprised me all over again. A transmission opened between Whitfield's ship and Grant's, informal and clearly not intended for any official record. I should not have continued recording it. Proper observation protocol suggests focusing only on tactically relevant communications. I recorded it anyway, unable to stop myself from wanting to understand these strange, complicated beings more fully. "How's the arm?" Whitfield asked, her voice noticeably weaker than during the height of the battle, carrying the particular exhaustion that follows extreme danger finally passing. "Could be worse," Grant answered, a faint attempt at humor, evident despite obvious discomfort in his tone. "Doc says I'll keep it. Just need to stay off it for a while." "Good. You did solid work out there today. Learned from the best, Commander. There was a pause, comfortable rather than tense, before Whitfield spoke again, her voice softer now. I heard about Ellen's ship. How's she holding up? Shaken, but okay. Lost her co-pilot's console entirely. Had to fly the last 20 minutes on backup systems alone. She's tougher than she looks, though. She always has been. I paused my analysis, struck by something in this simple exchange that I had not expected. These were not the words of soldiers discussing tactical outcomes. These were the words of people who genuinely cared about each other, checking on well-being not because protocol demanded it, but because the alternative, simply moving on without acknowledging what had happened, felt unthinkable to them. My species does not typically form such connections during observation assignments. We are trained from childhood to remain distant, to view the subjects of our study as data points rather than individuals worthy of personal concern. I had followed that training faithfully throughout my entire career. Listening to Whitfield and Grant speak so plainly about their concern for each other, I found myself wondering, for the first time, whether that distance had cost me something important. Something I had never even realized I was missing until this exact moment. A new transmission interrupted my thoughts, this one carrying a different tone entirely. I adjusted my sensors and found the source, a small memorial gathering forming aboard one of the human ships, crew members standing together in a quiet room while a young officer read names from a datapad. I did not understand at first why a memorial gathering was occurring, given the earlier report of 0 fatalities among the human crews. My confusion cleared quickly, painfully, when I realized the names being read belonged not to humans at all. They belonged to Dravani soldiers, the crews of the escort vessels destroyed during the battle. "We do not know their names," the young officer said, her voice steady, despite the clear difficulty of the moment. "We do not know if they had families waiting for them, or dreams they hoped to return to, or reasons beyond simple orders for being here today. But they were someone's people, and their deaths matter, even to us, especially to us." I sat in stunned silence, unable to process what I was witnessing. I had recorded thousands of battles throughout my career, had studied the aftermath of countless conflicts between countless species. I had never once witnessed the victors holding a memorial for their defeated enemies. "We fought them because they threatened people we are sworn to protect," the officer continued. "That does not mean we celebrate their deaths. War is not something to take pride in, even when it ends in victory. It is something we endure because sometimes there is no other way to keep the people we love safe. We honor these losses, even from the other side, because pretending they do not matter would make us into something we refuse to become." My translation systems flagged several phrases as significant, but I could not bring myself to process them clinically, the way proper observation protocol required. I simply listened, my own systems struggling with something that felt uncomfortably close to grief, though grief for beings I had never even met, on either side of this conflict. Whitfield's voice joined the gathering, and I recognized the particular weariness in it now, the exhaustion of someone who had spent the entire encounter making decisions that cost lives on both sides, decisions she clearly felt the full weight of even in victory. "I keep thinking about their commander," she said quietly. "Threx Cole. I keep wondering what made him choose this fight. Orders from someone higher up? Belief in some cause we don't understand? Fear of what happens if he fails? I don't know. I probably never will. But I hope, wherever he ended up after retreating today, that he finds some other way forward, one that doesn't end with more people dying on either side." I paused my recording entirely for a long moment, unable to process what I had just witnessed. A human commander, having just survived an overwhelming attack that nearly cost her own life, having watched her crew face injuries and her ship take damage that should have destroyed it entirely, was expressing genuine concern for the well-being of the enemy commander who had ordered that very attack. This did not fit any pattern my species uses to understand warfare. Victors do not typically express compassion for defeated enemies who sought to destroy them. Such compassion, by every framework my careful analytical training had provided, seemed to serve no practical purpose. It offered no tactical advantage, no strategic benefit, nothing that could be measured or filed away as useful data for future engagements. And yet there it was, spoken plainly and without hesitation by the very commander whose skill and determination had won this battle against overwhelming odds. I began to understand, sitting alone in my small pod with the quiet aftermath of battle spread across my sensors, that humans were not simply skilled warriors who happened to also possess unusual emotional depth. Their compassion and their capability seemed woven together in ways my species had never encountered before. They fought fiercely because they cared deeply, and they grieved even their enemies because that same capacity for caring did not simply switch off once the immediate danger had passed. This realization sat heavily inside me, disrupting the careful, distant framework I had relied upon throughout my entire career as an observer. I had been trained to believe that emotional distance made for better, more accurate observation. Watching these humans, I began to wonder whether that distance had actually prevented me from truly understanding anything I had ever observed before this moment. The memorial gathering concluded, and the human crews returned to their repair work, their conversations gradually shifting back toward practical matters of ship maintenance and system diagnostics. But something had changed in the tone of those conversations now, something softer, more connected, as though the shared experience of danger and loss had drawn these people even closer together than they had been before the battle began. I continued monitoring their communications throughout the following hours, no longer purely for the sake of proper observation protocol, but because I found myself genuinely wanting to understand these beings more completely. I listened as Dobson comforted a younger crew member who had frozen briefly during the height of the engagement, offering reassurance without a hint of judgment for a moment of very human fear. "Everyone freezes sometimes," Dobson said gently. "What matters is that you came back. You did your job when it counted most. That's what makes you good at this, not pretending you were never scared in the first place." I listened as Hunt organized repair schedules with the same careful, analytical precision I recognized from my own species' approach to complex tasks, proving that humans were capable of exactly the kind of detached, methodical thinking my culture valued so highly, even while also possessing this other, entirely different capacity for deep emotional connection that seemed equally central to who they were. I listened as Whitfield, despite her obvious exhaustion, personally checked on every single member of her crew before finally allowing herself to rest, ensuring that each person understood their contribution to the day's survival mattered, that their fear and their courage both had been witnessed and valued. By the time evening fell across the colony world below, casting long shadows across the damaged but still standing settlements, I found myself facing a truth I had been trying to avoid since the battle first began. I could no longer view these humans as simple data points to be recorded and filed away. I could no longer maintain the comfortable distance my species relies upon to study other beings without becoming entangled in their struggles, their fears, their remarkable capacity for both fierce determination and genuine compassion. Something inside me had shifted, permanently, during those tense hours of observation, and I did not know how to properly categorize what that shift meant for my future as a Ketra observer. My entire career had been built upon the assumption that proper distance allowed for clearer, more objective understanding. Watching humans navigate both the brutal necessity of combat and the tender aftermath of loss, with equal skill and equal depth of feeling, I began to wonder whether that assumption had been wrong all along. Perhaps true understanding required exactly the kind of emotional investment my species had spent generations training its observers to avoid. Perhaps distance, rather than revealing clearer truths, had only ever shown us the shallow surface of whatever species we studied, never the deeper currents that actually drove their choices and defined their character. I sat with this uncomfortable possibility as the stars wheeled slowly overhead, my recording system still gathering data out of habit rather than any remaining sense of clinical detachment. Somewhere below me, on a colony world that had nearly fallen to overwhelming force, families were beginning the slow work of rebuilding what damage had been done, comforted by the knowledge that a fleet of 7 small ships, crewed by people who cared as fiercely as they fought, had stood between them and disaster. I thought about Sorenth's confident dismissal before I left, his casual assurance that this assignment would be simple, unremarkable, barely worth the effort of proper documentation. I thought about how thoroughly wrong he had been, and how thoroughly wrong my own assumptions had been as well, walking into this assignment with the same comfortable certainty that had shaped my entire career until this single, transformative day. I did not yet know how I would explain any of this to my superiors when I finally returned home. I did not yet know how to properly file a report that captured not just the tactical data my mission required, but the deeper truth I had witnessed, a truth about courage and compassion and connection that seemed to defy every category my species had ever developed for understanding the beings we observe. I only knew, watching the quiet, exhausted, deeply human aftermath of a battle that should never have been survivable, that I would never again approach an observation assignment with the same detached confidence I had carried into this one. Something had changed inside me, something permanent, and I suspected, with a mixture of fear and something almost like gratitude, that I would spend a very long time trying to understand exactly what that change meant for who I was going to become. The journey home felt longer than any I had taken before, even though the actual distance remained unchanged from every previous assignment I had completed throughout my career. I spent much of that journey staring at my collected data, unable to begin organizing it into the clean, structured report my superiors expected. Every time I tried to write the opening summary, the words felt hollow, incomplete, failing entirely to capture what I had actually witnessed during those transformative hours above that small colony world. By the time my vessel finally docked at the Ketra observation station, I still had not managed to produce anything resembling a proper report. Sorenth met me at the docking bay personally, which surprised me somewhat, given that such assignments rarely warranted his direct attention. "Well," he said, his tone carrying the same casual confidence I remembered from before I left, "I trust the humans proved as unremarkable as expected. Nothing unusual to report, I imagine." I opened my mouth to answer, and found myself unable to produce the simple, reassuring confirmation he clearly anticipated. Instead, silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable, until Sorenth's expression shifted into something more curious, more concerned. "Ilun, is something wrong?" "I do not know how to answer your question," I finally said, my voice carrying a weight I had never heard in it before. "Because nothing about what I witnessed was unremarkable. I am not certain any report I could write would properly capture what actually happened." Sorenth's expression grew more serious, and he gestured for me to follow him toward the small conference chamber, typically reserved for detailed debriefings following significant assignments. I had never before required such a formal setting to discuss my findings. My reports had always been straightforward, clinical, easily summarized within the first few minutes of conversation. This time felt entirely different. We settled into the chamber, and Sorenth activated the recording systems that would document our conversation for the official archive. "Tell me what happened," he said simply. "From the beginning." I began recounting the events as I had witnessed them, describing the overwhelming numerical disadvantage the human fleet faced, the strange, unpredictable tactics they employed, the way their entire approach to combat seemed to defy every pattern my species had ever documented among other species we had studied. Sorenth listened carefully, his expression gradually shifting from polite attention to genuine surprise as I continued. "They flew directly into the enemy formation," I explained, "not to escape it, but to use its own size against itself. No species I have ever studied has attempted such a tactic, let alone succeeded with it." "Perhaps they simply got fortunate," Sorenth suggested, though I noted uncertainty creeping into his voice now. "Chance favors the bold on occasion, even when the underlying strategy remains flawed." "It was not chance," I said firmly. "I watched their commander sacrifice her own ship's safety repeatedly, drawing enemy fire away from vulnerable transports, and she did so with a steadiness that suggested absolute certainty in her choices, not desperate improvisation. Every decision I witnessed followed a consistent internal logic, one built entirely around protecting others rather than personal survival. I continued describing the battle's turning points, the human fleet's coordinated counterattack once the Dravani formation began to falter, the precision with which they targeted critical systems rather than simply attempting to destroy enemy vessels outright. I described Whitfield's decision not to pursue the retreating Dravani forces once the immediate threat to civilians had passed, and I watched Sorenth's expression shift again, this time into something approaching genuine unease. "That makes no tactical sense," he said slowly. "If victory was within reach, why cede that advantage?" "Because victory was never actually her goal," I explained, understanding the answer more clearly now than I had during the battle itself. Protection was her goal. Once that protection was secured, continuing the conflict held no value for her, regardless of any additional tactical advantage it might have provided. I described the aftermath as well, the memorial gathering held for the defeated Dravani crews, the genuine compassion Whitfield expressed, even for the enemy commander who had nearly destroyed her entire fleet. Sorenth remained silent through this portion of my report, his expression unreadable, though I detected a stillness in him that suggested he was processing something far more significant than simple tactical data. "This behavior does not fit our existing frameworks for understanding warfare among young species," he finally said. "Young species typically demonstrate either overwhelming aggression or overwhelming caution. They rarely display this kind of nuanced balance between fierce capability and genuine compassion." "That is precisely why I could not simply file a standard report," I said. "Because everything I witnessed suggests our existing frameworks are fundamentally inadequate for understanding this particular species. We assumed, based on their youth and limited technological development, that humans would prove simple to categorize. I no longer believe that assumption holds any validity whatsoever." Sorenth remained quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the implications of what I had described. Finally he spoke again, his voice carrying a seriousness I had rarely heard from him before. "What do you recommend, then? How should we properly categorize this species, if our existing frameworks fail to capture their true nature?" I considered this question carefully before answering, drawing upon everything I had witnessed throughout that transformative day. "I do not believe we can properly categorize them at all, at least not yet. Not through distant observation alone. Everything valuable I learned about humans came not from detached analysis, but from allowing myself to actually feel the weight of what I was witnessing. Their courage, their compassion, their willingness to sacrifice personal safety for the sake of others, none of that became comprehensible to me until I stopped trying to maintain proper observational distance. That contradicts everything our training teaches," Sorenth said, though his tone lacked its usual confidence now. "Distance is what allows for accurate, unbiased observation. Emotional investment introduces exactly the kind of subjective distortion we are trained from childhood to avoid." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "or perhaps our training has always limited our understanding more than it has enhanced it. Perhaps some species simply cannot be properly understood through distance alone, because their true nature only reveals itself through connection, through genuine emotional engagement with what they experience and why they choose the paths they choose." Sorenth studied me for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with concepts that clearly challenged assumptions he had held throughout his entire career, assumptions our entire species had held for generations beyond counting. "You believe humans represent something genuinely unprecedented, then? Not simply another young species we can eventually categorize using refined versions of our existing frameworks?" "I believe," I said slowly, choosing my words with careful deliberation, "that humans possess a combination of fierce capability and genuine compassion that our species has never before encountered in any civilization we have studied, regardless of age or technological development. I believe this combination makes them simultaneously less predictable and more remarkable than any species currently recorded in our archives, and I believe that any future observer sent to study them should be warned, clearly and explicitly, that maintaining proper emotional distance will prevent them from truly understanding what they are witnessing." Sorenth remained silent for several long moments, clearly processing the weight of what I had just suggested. Finally he spoke again, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity I had rarely heard from him before. "You are suggesting we fundamentally alter our approach to studying this species. That represents a significant departure from established Ketra observational protocol." "I am aware of that," I said. "I am also aware that established protocol nearly cost me the ability to properly understand anything I witnessed during that assignment. Had I maintained strict emotional distance throughout the entire encounter, I would have returned with nothing more than tactical data, numbers and positions and outcomes, entirely missing the deeper truth that actually explains why humans fight the way they fight, why they protect the way they protect, why they grieve even their enemies with the same sincerity they bring to celebrating their own survival." I paused, gathering my thoughts before continuing. "I do not believe we can afford to make that mistake again, particularly given how quickly this species appears to be expanding beyond their home system. If we intend to properly understand humans, whether for purposes of potential alliance or simply accurate documentation, we must be willing to abandon the comfortable distance that has served us adequately with other species, but which I now believe fundamentally fails when applied to humanity." Sorenth activated a secondary recording device, one I recognized as reserved for submissions directly to the highest levels of Ketra observational leadership. "I will need to review your full data logs personally before determining how to proceed with this recommendation. This represents a significant challenge to protocols that have remained unchanged for longer than either of us has existed." "I understand," I said, "but I would ask that whoever reviews my recommendation consider carefully what I witnessed, not simply as an unusual data point to be filed away and forgotten, but as a genuine warning about the limitations of our traditional observational approach. Humans are not simply another young species we can study from comfortable distance and eventually categorize using familiar frameworks. They require something different from us. They require observers willing to actually feel the weight of what they witness, even when that weight becomes uncomfortable, even when it challenges everything we believed about proper scientific detachment." Sorenth nodded slowly, clearly still processing the full implications of everything I had shared. "I will ensure your recommendation receives proper consideration," he finally said, "though I suspect this conversation marks only the beginning of a much longer discussion within our observational community." I left that meeting feeling a strange combination of relief and continued unease. Relief, because I had finally managed to communicate at least some portion of what I had witnessed, some fragment of the truth that had transformed my understanding so completely during that single, extraordinary day. Unease, because I understood that truly conveying the full weight of that experience through mere words and data logs remained fundamentally impossible. Some truths I had come to understand could only be properly grasped through direct experience, through the discomfort of watching courage and compassion intertwine in ways that challenged every comfortable assumption I had carried into that assignment. No report, however detailed, however carefully constructed, could fully capture what it felt like to watch a single human commander repeatedly risk her own destruction for the sake of strangers she had never even met, or to witness an entire crew hold genuine grief for enemies who had tried their utmost to destroy them. I understood now why my initial attempts at writing a standard report had failed so completely. I had been trying to compress an experience that had fundamentally changed my understanding of what courage and compassion actually meant into the same clinical, distant format I had used for countless previous assignments. That format simply could not accommodate what I had actually learned. In the days that followed, I found myself returning repeatedly to my recorded data, listening again to the voices of Whitfield and her crew, studying the patterns of their decision-making with a mixture of continued analytical interest and something else entirely, something closer to genuine respect for beings whose capacity for both fierce determination and deep compassion continued to surprise me each time I revisited those recordings. I do not know what conclusions my superiors will ultimately draw from my recommendation. I do not know whether future Ketra observers will be permitted to abandon the comfortable distance our species has relied upon for countless generations, or whether tradition and established protocol will simply absorb my unusual report as an isolated anomaly, quickly forgotten amid the vast archive of more conventional observations. What I do know, with absolute certainty that I never possessed before this assignment began, is that I will never again approach any observation with the same confident detachment I carried before witnessing humans in battle for the first time. Something fundamental shifted inside me during those tense, terrifying, ultimately transformative hours. Something that I suspect will continue shaping how I understand not just humanity, but the entire practice of observation itself, for the remainder of my career. If any future observer reads this report before undertaking a similar assignment, I offer this warning, born from hard experience rather than comfortable theory. Do not expect humans to behave according to familiar patterns established by other young species. Do not assume that overwhelming disadvantage guarantees predictable outcomes, and most importantly, do not attempt to maintain the same emotional distance that has served our species adequately in countless previous observations. Prepare instead to be changed by what you witness. Prepare to feel genuine fear for beings you have no personal connection to, genuine relief at their survival, genuine grief at losses that touch even those on the opposing side of conflict. Prepare, in other words, to become something other than a simple, distant observer, because I do not believe humans can truly be understood any other way. I was told to watch humans in battle, expecting nothing more than routine documentation of an unremarkable young species facing predictably overwhelming odds. Instead, I witnessed something that fundamentally challenged everything I believed about courage, about compassion, about the true nature of strength itself. I do not regret what I witnessed, even now, even with the discomfort and uncertainty that continues to accompany my changed understanding of proper observational practice. But I understand now why the weight of that day has never fully left me, why I still find myself returning to those recordings, searching for deeper meaning within moments I have already studied countless times before. I was warned this assignment would be simple. I now understand that no assignment involving humanity could ever truly be described that way again, and for any observer who follows in my path, I offer this final truth, learned through experience rather than comfortable theory. You may be told to simply watch, but once you witness humans facing impossible odds with equal measures of fierce determination and genuine compassion, you will understand, as I now understand, that simple observation was never truly possible at all.